This is Metrosource Minis, the official podcast of Metrosource Magazine and home of short-form interviews with your favorite personalities from the LGBTQ world and beyond. Quick, fun, and informative. It's Metrosource on the go. Out and proud since 1990. Well, hello. This is Alexander Rodriguez, lead writer for Metrosource Magazine and avid podcaster. During COVID, there has been one industry that has been getting us through this. I'm not talking about Postmates, but thank you, Postmates. I'm talking about entertainment. New York Post reported that the average American is watching 8 hours a day of content. And we know that we've experienced a boom in LGBTQ representation and also a boom in LGBTQ entertainment, people coming out of the closet. So we have all of this energy going on. And today our guest is Director of Entertainment Media for GLAAD, Jeremy Blacklow. He joined GLAAD in 2017 as Director of Entertainment Media, where he serves as liaison between GLAAD and the film, television, music, and even gaming sectors. He works to ensure that the industry is equipped to leverage GLAAD's research and resources to bring about fair, inclusive, accurate, and diverse representation of LGBTQ people and issues. Prior to GLAAD, he worked as a journalist with a focus in entertainment news. He began his career in New York City at NBC's Weekend Today show and has worked for CNN, Telepictures, and NBC Universal. He helped launch the TMZ brand and also the CAA-created digital agency WhoSay. He spent 5 years as managing editor of AccessHollywood.com and later spearheaded the editorial relationship between Yahoo and CBS's The Insider, appearing frequently on air as a contributor. In recent years, he has worked as a digital marketing consultant while also freelance writing for publications including Variety, The Wrap, and ET Online. He's a proud 10-time AIDS life cycle participant, an electronic music producer, and a DJ. Hey, Mr. DJ, put a record on. We have Jeremy Blacklow here. Hey.
Hello. Thank you for having me today.
Of course. So I want to know what it's like to sit back and listen to your resume kind of recited to you. You have done so much in your career.
Like, who is this guy? I want to meet him. Like,
It's you. But so many aspects of entertainment, from, fun celebrity gossip, but to presidential elections, the Iraq War. What was that turning point in your career where it kind of clicked for you and you're like, okay, my path is clear. I'm here to make a name for myself. What was that turning point for you?
That's a great question. I mean, I really come from the same background that you come from, Alexander. I was a journalist, and my whole dream, my whole life was just to get into journalism and to do meaningful work. And then very early on, I found myself gravitating towards entertainment because, like you, I love entertainment. I love Hollywood. I love storytelling. And really that's, whether you're a hard news journalist or you're in the middle of Hollywood, like my career's gone the direction of being, at the end of the day, it's storytelling, right? At the end of the day, the thing it all has in common is the humanity and being really committed to that art of storytelling, whether you're the one telling the story or helping someone tell the story or working, in this weird ecosphere that we call the entertainment industry. And so, for me, I really just, did the journalism thing for a long time. And then I hit that point in my 40s where I needed something different. And when the opportunity to go work for GLAAD full-time came along, it all clicked. And I was like, oh, this is what I want to be doing with my life right now. And I haven't really looked back since.
Now, what was it about journalism? Like when you were a kid, was there like a news segment you saw, or was it, like Entertainment Tonight as a kid? What was it about journalism that really kind of sparked your interest in that?
That's a really good question, actually. And we didn't really get into this in the amazing profile that I'm so grateful that you wrote. You wrote for me in Metrosource, which my family and friends are so proud of.
It was so fun to write.
I was very honored. Thank you. My mom was a journalist. Actually,
wow.
My mom was an on-air anchor and reporter at the NBC affiliate in Seattle, Washington. And she was one of the first journalists ever to appear on air pregnant in the mid-70s with me. And I sort of grew up in a newsroom. Like I literally would go after school some days. My parents were divorced. A lot of the time I was with my mom, and I basically grew up in the King 5 newsroom in Seattle, Washington, and was surrounded by television journalism my whole life. In a pre-internet era, I would watch the Today Show all the time and sort of fell in love with watching Jane Pauley and Bryant Gumbel, and then Rick and Matt Lauer on the Today Show. And my whole life, I was like, I'm going to work for the Today Show one day. And sure enough, I did. I interned for them when I was in college, living in New York City. And then, went and got my first job out of school working for the Today Show. So that sort of watching it and being around it and being around journalists all the time, I always sort of thought all my mom's coworkers were so cool. They swore all the time, and they and I was like, yeah, this is a career path for me, and that's kind of how I fell in love with it.
So, Jeremy, I'm an attention whore, but I'm also a mama's boy. What was it like having a mom? I'm sure she was so busy. If she wasn't on camera she was doing her research. She was probably always working. And did you feel like you had to share her attention with the world? Or was it just kind of exciting? Because I would have been like, hello, I'm over here.
Yeah. It was definitely a balance. That's for sure. I consider myself an extrovert and a very outgoing person. My mom is like that times 100. My mom is personality, and it's no surprise that her only son became a gay man, was born a gay man.
Word.
We're very close. She would get a kick out of this, but we have a very funny story about when I was 3 years old once. My mom queer people were in our lives all the time. Like my mom, many of her friends were queer when I was growing up. And it was a very funny story. It was about 3 years old, and she put this in a book she wrote about her career that came out last year, where I was 3 years old and Divine showed up at our doorstep.
Oh my God.
And,
God.
And keep in mind, this is going to come across problematic, but I answered the door and I said, Mom, there's something at the door, but I'm not sure what it is. Of course, we say this through that would be a problematic thing to say now. But, as a 3-year-old answering the door in the 70s, that's what a 3-year-old would say to Divine showing up at your front door. But that's a funny story I always like to joke about.
Oh my God, that's a great story.
Around our house growing up.
Yeah. So I have to know, what's a typical week as director of entertainment media at GLAAD look like? Like, what's a typical week? Share that with us.
That's a great question. You asked one of the great questions to get insight into the world of GLAAD. There is no typical week. The best thing about my job that I love so much is that no 2 weeks or no 2 days are the same. On any given morning, I wake up and I'm not sure, what my day is going to look like. For example, last week with everything about the Golden Globes, and we don't have to go into it too much. We could if you want to. But
no, thanks.
Yeah, exactly. But it's like, I couldn't have foreseen the way that GLAAD was going to react to the Golden Globes, or how we were going to approach the fact that the HFPA did not have a single Black member for 2 decades. And so it was like a fascinating conversation with my coworkers about, what is GLAAD's role in this, as an ally organization that stands up for social justice? How, what is, are we going to put out a statement? Are we going to take action? What is the right course of action? How are we going to cover the Golden Globes this year? How is it going to be different than how we've done it in past years in light of this new information? And that's just one example of, I think, the many ways that, you never know what's coming. You never know what's coming, and it really keeps you on your toes. And, I had a, fascinating conversation about a project I can't talk about with Netflix this morning. And then we had a big conversation about the GLAAD Media Awards and the video game category right after that. And every day is different. And I will say, and I think I said this in the interview with MetroSource, is that I'm constantly learning. And I turned 45 this year, and to be constant in a job where you're constantly learning, I think is the greatest blessing. Especially from the younger folks at GLAAD, my younger coworkers, who I'm constantly just blown away by.
Well, I have to just say, you make 45 look good. And when the article came out, I got so many DMs about the article. And I'm like, oh, we talked about so many great issues. And so many of them were like, is he single? Is he single? Is he single? I'm like, calm down, bitches. So, Jeremy.
The universe.
You've been behind the scenes of entertainment. You've also been a consumer of entertainment, like we said, from very young age. Now you have this big title for one of the most important organizations of our community and entertainment. There must be this huge pressure to always put your best foot forward in a super PC way, meaning you can't be honest if a movie bores you, the acting is bad, or if a film or a TV show just isn't good. Is that hard? Because we know as gay men, we're very opinionated. Is that hard? It's like, God, you just can't just sit and be like, God, that sucked.
Yeah. I mean, there are moments where I wish I could just go on Twitter and be like, this film sucks, y'all. But again, it's going to reflect on GLAAD, right? We talked about that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Everything I say and do will always reflect on GLAAD. And I'm very cognizant of that. And it's funny. We always say GLAAD, before social media, GLAAD was very much a watchdog group. With the advent of social media, we very much became a resource to Hollywood.
Totally.
So, because gay Twitter calls it out for us. We don't have to, 20 years, GLAAD was the only one calling it out on LGBTQ representation. Social media changed everything. And so, it's very rare we speak out against a project. So even if I were to speak out personally on my social media about something, it would be like, oh, GLAAD's, entertainment director hates this show or this film. So I am really cognizant about that. But I also, as somebody who's an artist myself, who dabbles in music and DJing and producing, I have a tremendous amount of respect for any artist who puts themselves out there. And, there was a point in my life where I was much more publicly critical of things and I guess a little more jaded. But I have a tremendous respect for any creator in any field of artistry. And so I really try to rise above any negativity. And if I have a thought, about something crappy to say, I keep it with my coworkers and we'll vent to each other, which is really my outlet. And they're out there, those projects that could have done a lot better. And, it's much more fun when we get to publicly praise something that's really wonderful, which is what we're more likely to do. And that's, when something like Disclosure comes along, or The Lady in the Dale and Veneno, which just came out. There are all these great projects that we really get to uplift both to the community and beyond the community. And I really love that part of the job.
Well, you do put a positive spin on everything. I tend to be more vocal. I don't have the responsibility that you do. And so I'm wondering, and this is a conversation I've had many, many times off the record and on the record, because like you said, when you're in the privacy, you can kind of share your opinions and get that venting out. But do you think as the LGBTQ community that we are just so happy to have representation out there, that we're not holding ourselves accountable, we're not holding each other accountable, and we pay less attention to quality of acting or the quality of content because we're just so happy to be on camera?
I would say actually the opposite is true at this stage game in the year 2021, right? Because, when I think about when I first interned at GLAAD, which was in 1998, that was right as, God, I can't remember the year Will and Grace premiered, but it was right after Ellen and, Queer as Folk and the L Word hadn't even premiered yet. Or let's just say the period of the early 2000s when it would be like, there's these, a few shows with LGBTQ characters or storylines on them. And now there's hardly a show on television that doesn't have at least one LGBTQ character. And so I think as a community, we're holding ourselves to a much higher standard and not letting things go as much. Part of this has to do with the overall push for greater diversity, from a complete intersectional perspective across, for all representation in all projects in Hollywood. But, I really think we demand more at this point, and that the representation that was good 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago doesn't necessarily hold up. And we all have to do better. And that's really why we have the GLAAD Media Awards and why the GLAAD Media Awards, I think, are becoming so much bigger year over year in terms of what they mean to a studio or a network to win one, is because we do have these really high standards of impact and boldness of representation. Every year the hardest thing for me is like those shows that were right on the bubble of getting a GLAAD Media Award nomination.
Yeah.
And it's like a couple of them, we do reach out and we were like, look, you were like, if we could have just had one more nominee, you would have been there, but there's so much great representation that to really get a GLAAD Media Award nomination now, you really have to go above and beyond and also reflect the full intersectional diversity of the LGBTQ community.
And when you said it, it really kind of clicked for me that GLAAD did go from being like the tisk tisk tisk, like the school teacher, waiting for you to mess up, but it's become a leader in positivity and being a consultant. We're even talking about the gaming industry. The gaming industry has changed in representation so much, even in the last 2 years. And so I think GLAAD as this positive kind of force, it makes people like me that's quick to do like a snappy liner about that movie was terrible. It makes me rethink what I'm coming from. But I'm going to be honest with you, sometimes I've been attacked because I don't like a project or I think acting is bad. People automatically categorize me as transphobic or homophobic. And, we as gay journalists can't just assume that people know that we're all inclusive. We just can't assume that anymore. I used to be like, duh, I'm homophobic, I'm transphobic, please, I'm gay. That doesn't mean anything anymore because we've seen bigotry in our own community. But again, my opinion has just been discounted rather than, no, I'm talking about the acting, I'm talking about the entertainment quality because I'm a consumer. It automatically gets categorized that you hate this group of people or that you're attacking this group of people. How do we change that?
Wow, that's a lot. How do we change that? I guess if I were to give a short answer, it's one dialogue at a time, right? It's I don't know if there's a strong answer to this is the answer to changing it. I think it's nuance and it's communication and it's dialogue with each other, both within the community and with content creators at large and within the industry, right? I'll give an example. That's a recent example of a film I really loved, but that other people in the LGBTQ community were highly critical of. And I think this is just emblematic of what we're talking about right now, which is the film I Care a Lot, which just came out on Netflix.
I just want, oh God, love.
Me too. So yeah. I bring it up and I single it out only because I also love this film. Now, several of my coworkers, this film had tropes, right? And GLAAD is I always use the analogy, we point out the landmines to content creators, and it's up to you, the content creator, to choose whether or not to step on that landmine. But we're going to be a barometer and a litmus test to you of the LGBTQ community and their likely reaction to things. Now, I will say that we did not consult on this film. This was not a Netflix original. It was a film that was produced and financed independently and picked up at Toronto by Netflix. And I really loved this movie. I thought it was really fantastic. Rosamund Pike just won a Golden Globe. Take that with a salt, it being the Globes. But I thought it was deserved. I thought the acting was fantastic. But there were three tropes here, right? One is sort of the villainous queer person. Two is I don't want to give any spoilers, but let's just say there's a trope out there called barrier gaze. That's a trope that we often draw attention to for Hollywood. And three, it's not really so much of a trope as much as it's something some people had issue with straight actors playing queer roles, right? Which is something that we talk about often, and the differences between trans actors, cis actors playing trans roles versus non-LGBT actors playing LGBT roles. We could go off for an hour about that. But some people really just didn't want anything to do with that film. I'm talking some people from the community, not some people.
Right.
Because of those tropes. For me, I would say, but this was a really good film, right? This was a smart film with smart things to say about capitalism, about America, about casual... The elderly, casual representation of LGBTQ people, which is something we call on often, which is like, this was not an LGBTQ film. This was a film where the villains happened to be queer, but it was not a queer film. And I really liked the movie. I thought it was good filmmaking. Was it perfect? No, not by any means. But I thought it was a great movie. And so that's just one example of like, you know, you're going to please some people some of the time, but you're not going to please all people all the time with your art. And that's where I try to be really sensitive. I've never spoken to filmmakers. I don't know Jay Blakeson, who wrote and directed the film, but you know, I really love the movie. So Jay Blakeson, if you're watching, Rosamund, love the movie. But you know, not everyone in the community did, and that's where I think dialogue becomes so important, and looking at nuance and not saying that things are necessarily have to be all this or all that, but that there's room for, you know, the proverbial gray instead of the black and white in between.
Well, and I tell you, I love casual representation. I think we're seeing a lot of it in commercials where, oh, there's a gay couple, and it's just told as a matter of fact. It's not like this is the gay commercial. It's like, oh, it's part of it. And I think that we need more of that because characters, we as a gay community, we know there's villains in our community. There's every type of person in our community. So, you know, the more I think we integrate it as just part of the storyline, the more I think we're going to build bridges with viewers that are not exposed to LGBTQ people in real life on a regular basis. And it's just told matter of fact. This story was about something else, you know, that was part of her life and her love story, by the way, which, you know, that was a positive aspect of her villainous, her only source of love was this relationship, which I totally got. And it, you know, it wasn't dependent on it being a lesbian relationship. It was just a relationship.
Yeah. And, you know, like Tracy Gilchrist, the editor-in-chief of The Advocate, loved it. And like, I know a lot of lesbians who really love this movie, right? Like and so I don't think you throw the baby out with the bathwater just with the tropes, because even though it's important to acknowledge those tropes, you know?
Okay. So you kind of brought up the subject, and this has been such a hot topic. And it's something I've talked about, and I get so many kind of weird messages and good messages and informative messages, but we're talking about, is there a double standard when we're talking about gay representation? James Corden was in the prom, and everybody went crazy saying, oh, this is why you shouldn't have a straight man playing a gay man. Awful, awful, awful. But then we have Paul Bettany playing and nailing it as Uncle Frank, and everybody is happy, and what a beautiful movie. Everybody needs to see this movie. There wasn't that same conversation. So aren't we just talking about acting quality, or are we talking about representation, and do we have double standards? Is it a fair conversation?
Yeah. And again, I just go back to, it's a project by project situation, right? I mean, I think I can't remember if I said this in the article, but I counted like 17 projects that could be LGBTQ inclusive in consideration for the Academy Awards this year. You know, again, you know, not just Paul Bettany, but Viola Davis and Andra Day playing bi women in their respective films this year. Stanley Tucci and Colin Firth in Supernova, Kate Winslet and Ronan in Ammonite. There's so many this year, and straight actors playing gay roles. And again, this is where the conversation gets super interesting, right? I think what struck a chord with the James Corden situation, which, by the way, most of the criticism I saw against Corden's performance was from cisgender gay white men, which is fine, of which I am one. But, you know, I felt like it struck this chord of shame in people. Like very Velvet Rage type stuff. You know, a straight actor playing an over-the-top, effeminate gay character that dealt in stereotypes that probably were triggering for some people. And we could go a whole nother podcast episode about shame, and I've been listening to a lot of Brene Brown lately, so shame and vulnerability. And whatnot, but I think that, you know, the reason why Corden's getting more criticized than, say, Viola Davis or Andra Day for playing bi women is that that role struck something for people, and so I don't think there's like, I don't think you can say straight actors shouldn't play LGBT roles the same way you can say cis actors should not play trans roles, right? Because there are very distinct differences and reasons for that. But I think every role has to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. And I do think, Russell T Davies just came out with a very big statement when It's a Sin dropped, talking about I purposefully only cast gay actors. And at the same time, I have all these studios coming to me saying, like, we can't ask an actor in their the audition room about their sexual orientation. It's illegal to do so, which it is. You cannot say, are you gay when you're auditioning for a role? Are you bi? Are you lesbian? So it's nuanced, and every situation is different, is my only non-answer answer to that.
Well, and my whole thing, like you said, we have all these movies for contenders as Academy Awards. Some of your favorite projects that you listed will never see the light of day in a huge mainstream or to a huge mainstream audience. And so if we want our stories told in a huge way, I think sometimes we do have to rely on star power. Thank God we have bigger names that are coming out as LGBTQ. So we are taking baby steps to that. But, when the whole Scarlett Johansson thing happened, I said, okay, then give me another A-list trans actor that we can replace, because we know it's a business at the end of the day. You need people to finance the film. You need people to distribute the film. And sometimes if you don't have a major name, it'll never get made. Or if it does get made, it's going to be shown to a very small percentage of the audience. We're going to be preaching to the choir. And so I think that's important too.
My favorite part of that story, the film was Rub and Tug in 2018, is that this past fall it was announced that it's going to be redone as a TV series with Our Lady J show running it, and a trans male actor who's not yet been announced in the leading role. That's been in the trade, so that's public information.
I had no clue. You are the bringer of news.
Yeah. So it's like there's always a solution, right? It's like, if you've watched Disclosure, if you can't find a trans actor for your role, you're not looking hard enough.
Right.
And whether it's like, okay, so it's not going to be a blockbuster film with Scarlett Johansson starring as a cisgender woman in a transgender male role. But guess what? You were able to pivot the project, adapt it to television, and find a way where it could be the next Pose, for all we know.
Yeah. It's funny, when Brokeback Mountain came out, I saw that. I didn't know how graphic it was going to be, but I saw it with my grandma. And the only reason she went to see it was because she knew the names that were the stars and she loved them, right? And so we saw this very eye-opening film for her, which dealt with a lot of issues, but because it had that kind of star power in a comfortable, from comfortable actors, that she felt comfortable with, she had seen their work. That's the only reason she went to see the film, and she was better for it. Our relationship was better for it as well. Although it was very uncomfortable sitting next to my grandma during the sex scene.
During the sex scenes.
Like, where did it go?
I love that. I love hearing that. I wonder if Brokeback would have the same impact if it came out in 2021 that it did in 2005.
That's very interesting.
Right? In 2005, absolutely. And LGBTQ rights and as a social justice movement, we were in such a different place, right? Yeah. And so I Brokeback did amazing things back then. And I think the film still holds up as a film, but I wonder if it would have had the same impact if it came out now that it did then.
That is a very, very interesting comment. Okay, so, we're sitting here in the middle of the day talking about these issues. You've already been to work this morning talking about another huge project. You probably are going to go on to talk about something, big for this afternoon in your personal life. And I'm going to go text my friend about Real Housewives of New Jersey. Hey. There's just a different pressure that you have all day. How do you deal with a term? This is what I call activist fatigue, where every conversation you have is heavy. I'm sure when you go to a cocktail party, somebody wants to ask you these issues because they want to know what the expert has to say or what a PC way to say it. Every panel you're on, every party you go to, every email you send has to have this kind of heaviness. How do you deal with this activist fatigue, and how do you kind of unwind and take a breath from it all? It's exhausting.
It is, and thank you for asking that and acknowledging that, because not just myself, but all of my coworkers at GLAAD, it can really be heavy stuff, every day when we have, our daily staff meetings and we're talking about the news of the day and what's going on. Like, oftentimes we're dealing with hate crimes or anti-trans violence, and now all the awful bills, the trans high school athlete bills that are popping up all over the country. And it can, I don't want to call it like PTSD, but it does. That's for anyone working in a nonprofit, I think, has this issue that they have to constantly process, which is, you know, if I'm constantly working on this cause, how do I process absorbing it all and take and, you know, dealing with it? And the truth is, you have to be really active about self-care, like really, really being close to yourself emotionally. And like for me, that's I'm in therapy every week. I have a therapist I have a long-term relationship with, who I trust and I can really bounce things off of, because I think mental health is super important for all of us. And you know, some days I just need to be like, yeah, I need a massage this week. You know? You know, it's self-care is so important and so underrated, especially in the LGBTQ community, where we're all dealing with trauma in some form, to whatever degree. And so I rely on my coworkers. I really rely on my coworkers. I alluded to that before. They're really amazing people, and I would say to work at GLAAD, you have to, you know, have a really big heart and be really sensitive and feel very deeply. And it's that reason that we are people who feel very deeply that we work there. And at the same time, that's also what we use to help support each other.
I think that's so important. And it's also important for us from the community who rely on our activists to come to the prides, be, you know, visible at especially during this last Pride season. I know a lot of celebrities that were exhausted because they could attend, so to speak, every Pride, but then we know that there's an exhaustion that comes with Zoom and then always having to be on, always having to be PC. We demand a lot from our activists as well, and it's important for us to realize that they need downtime, and if they say no to a certain event or something, they probably just kind of need a breath. So last before I go, so you've done the AIDS life cycle 10 times. I've dated people that have done the ride. I won't even go on a hike if it's not an open bar. But I've heard it's an amazing experience, but it's also very grueling. Why do you do it year after year? And what aspect gets easier? What aspect gets harder?
That's a great question. And unfortunately, for the second year in a row, there will not be an in-person AIDS life cycle, which is why the LA LGBT Center and the San Francisco AIDS Foundation need our donations so much this year. In their place, there's going to be something called Together Ride this year, in which you go out and you cycle on your own and raise money still to support the life-saving services that those sort of direct service organizations are providing here on the West Coast. Just two of many organizations doing this great work. You know, I did my first AIDS life cycle in 2008, and I just fell in love with the community at first. You know, it's 3,000 people that go down the coast for 7 days every year. And I was like, oh, this is my people. This is where I was meant to be. You know, I learned so much more about HIV/AIDS stigma through 10 times participating in the ride. And moreover, about those aforementioned life-saving services that the center and the SFAF provide. It's what gets harder is that my body's getting older, and let me tell you that. But the great thing about cycling is it's like every year the youngest participant is 18 and the oldest participant is usually in their 80s, because cycling is an activity that if you take care of your body, you can do.
For sure.
Like running, where like your knees might start hurting, cycling you can do for a long time. And it's a really social event. That's like the biggest misconception, is that I think some people think the AIDS life cycle is a race, when in fact it's like super social. And like I'm usually like coming in at the back of the pack every day to camp, because like I take my time, but the rest stops, and really take the time to watch the drag shows they have going on in the middle of the ride.
Yeah.
It's just a community, and I fell in love with this community early on, and I think I'll be a part of this community as long as it keeps happening. So my love, what gets easier is my love for this community and the support and what I get back from the people. And what gets harder is my body. My body aches.
Okay, before we let you go, let's play a little rapid fire. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay. So as a DJ, we know that you are an aficionado on music. So you are asked to play one artist for an entire club night. What artist would you choose?
Kylie Minogue.
Okay. What is a personal totem that you take with you on every AIDS life cycle?
A stuffed pug.
Oh.
There's one right now. They're all over my house.
So cute. What is your guilty pleasure movie? So bad it's good.
Oh gosh, that's such a good question. So bad it's good. Drop Dead Gorgeous.
Okay. And they just added it to HBO Max, by the way. What would the name of your biography be thus far?
My biography. Life in music and storytelling.
I think we could punch it up a little bit.
I could do better. Yeah.
Okay. What's the funniest interview red carpet experience that you've had? And I know you've been on many, many red carpets, both on it and behind it.
Oh gosh, I think once I was like forced to ask Warren Beatty about a potential affair, and he
my God,
told me to fuck off and moved.
As he should.
Yeah, something like that. It's the celebrity news days. It was a while ago.
Lord. All right, Jeremy, tell everybody where they can find you.
On Twitter, Instagram, DJ Blacklow. My Instagram is very much just about music and DJing. My Twitter is much more about GLAAD and my life's work in LGBTQ media.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to talk with us. It's such a pleasure speaking with you, and thank you for everything that you do for the community.
It's truly my honor, Alexander. It's been so great meeting you through this process. I'm so flattered and honored that you took the time to highlight my work and the work I do at GLAAD. So truly, the pleasure is mine. Thank you.
That has been my chat with Jeremy Blacklow. You can read my in-depth interview with him in our last issue of Metrosource on newsstands around the nation or at metrosource.com. That's our episode. I'm your host, Alexander Rodriguez. You can find me on Instagram at Alexander's on Air. Until next time, stay true. Do you, boo. That has been another Metrosource Mini. Like, share, and subscribe on your favorite podcast player, and check out the latest issue of Metrosource magazine on newsstands or online at metrosource.com. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram at Metrosource, and on Twitter at Metrosource Mag. Until next time, stay fabulous.